welcome to the last panel, which is just absolutely going to be sweet. These old men, who were, as I say, 25, 26 when the House of God came out, are the central core of our group. Now, I've got 3 very quick slides. Who's that? Anybody recognize that? That was Bergman, as he was known in those days. I got so bored being an internship that I got expert at making these arcs of paper cups. And that's, Eat My Dust Eddie took that picture in the on-call room. But that's me. I'm just, second slide. Hey, the circles are upper left, Chuck. Then you move along, Shem or Bergman, and the next one, Hyper Hooper with that lovely California haircut. And then on the right, if you go along with the Pancho Villa mustache, that's the Runt. And there is an NYU guy, Bob Press. Okay? Actually, there was no one else in that. Oh, Eat My Dust Eddie refused. I don't know where he was. He refused to even be part of this. And then the final, all right. These guys don't know about these slides. The last slide is very, very special. Maybe you guys can recall who it is. Now, this is on rounds, okay? And this is the chief, whose name I will not say, who is examining a patient. Look at those hands. Those are arachnodactyl fingers, right? This is a photo from the obituary in the Boston Globe of the chief of medicine, the Lego, okay? It is a beautiful, honorable obituary, a whole page, right? I read it avidly. And then I looked at it a little more closely. Who's in back of the chief, smiling on the right-hand side? Chuck. Who is next to him, smiling with that California haircut? That's Hyper Hooper. And who, leaning in the doorway with a mixture of doubt and repugnance, is me. He hated me. The last person he would want in his obituary was me. Do you believe it? That's all the slides. Okay. So, to introduce all of these people, I'm going to read a brief description of them from the House of God. Okay. First is Barry. Janet Surrey, who's my partner, my spouse, long time, is a model for Barry. And this is at the beginning of the book. Barry, a clinical psychologist, was curled up with Freud. Help, help, Roy said. Roy, you really are in terrible shape starting the internship. How bad is it? Roy said. Bad. Last week I hospitalized a patient who was found curled up under the covers just like that, and he was less anxious than you. Can you hospitalize me? Do you have insurance? Not till I start my internship. Then you'd have to go to the state facility. What should I do? I've tried everything and I'm still scared to death. Try denial. Denial? Yes, a primitive defense. Deny that it exists. The next one I will read is the character Chuck, who is Walter Eades over there. Okay. This is the first day after they've had a miserable discussion with the chief of medicine. Chuck and I had poured a good deal of bourbon and beer into our bodies and had gotten to the point of laughing. Chuck had grown up dirt poor in Memphis. I inquired as to how, from this humble beginning, he'd gotten to the pinnacle of academic medicine, the BMS-affiliated House of God. Well, man, you see, it was like this. One day when I was a senior in high school in Memphis, I got this postcard from Oberlin College, and it said, "Want to go to college at Oberlin? If so, fill out and return this card." That was it, man. That was all. No college board test, no application, no nothing. And so I did it. Next thing I know, I get this letter saying I've been accepted, full scholarship, 4 years. What made you decide to go to medical school? Same thing, man, same exact thing. In my senior year, I get this postcard from the University of Chicago. Want to go to medical school at Chicago? If so, fill out and return this card. That was all. No medical board test, no application, no nothing. Full scholarship, 4 years. So there it is, and here I am. And what about the House of God? I said. Same thing, man, same exact thing. Senior year, postcard, want to be an intern in the House of God? If so, fill out and return this card. There it is, something else, eh? Well, you sure put one over on him, I said. I thought I did, but you know, seeing these pitiful patients and all, I think those guys sending me the postcards knew all along I was trying to fool them by getting all this, so they fooled me by giving it all to me. My old man was right. The first postcard was my downfall. I should have joined the Army. You told me that story. True story. Okay. Eat my dust, Eddie. Richard Anderson. Eat my dust, Eddie. I had to find one that wasn't too damaging to his current reputation in his kosher job, which I won't mention. Okay. Sitting around the room that first day, it was a giant of a guy with a bushy red beard wearing a black leather motorcycle jacket and wraparound sunglasses, twirling a black motorcycle hat on his finger. Far out. And then a little later, when they encounter a few Gomers in the hallway, I asked Chuck, "What do you think of this?" And Chuck said, "Man, it's pitiful." And looming over us was the giant with the black motorcycle gear. This is true. He put on his black jacket again and said to us, "Guys, in my medical school in California, I never saw anybody as old as this. I'm going home to my wife." He turned, walked back down the corridor, and disappeared into the down elevator. On the back of his black motorcycle jacket was spelled out in shiny brass studs, "Eat my dust, Eddie." You had to be there. Okay. Hyper Hooper. Oh my God. Dave Heber. You can look at his, all these guys, they got remarkable biographies, and it's unbelievable. Okay. Hyper Hooper. I'm sorry, 111. Okay. As I was working on a patient in the emergency, I heard Hooper battling a Gomer behind the next curtain. The Gomer, his third admission of the night, was trying to kick him in the nuts. I asked Hooper how it was going. Terrible. M-O-R, Roy, M-O-R. M-O-R, marriage on rocks. We're both doing everything we can, joined a California-style sauna where they whip you with hot eucalyptus leaves and give you some aqua-nude group psychotherapy. But I don't think it's going to work. The little woman is mad as hell that I'm here all the time, and I'm into death. You're into death? Who isn't? It's where we're all headed, you know. I can't deny that, but I guess I don't get the charge out of it that you do. Doesn't matter, said Hooper. No kids. In California, being married 2 years means you've hit the median. Hey, I got a question for you. Do you think it's legal to have this woman sign her own post-mortem permission slip along with her insurance voucher? It's probably legal, but I'm not sure it's ethical. Great, said Hooper. Another post coming. In Sausalito, nobody's heard of ethics. Hey, thanks. I didn't want to stay married to her anyway. You should see what I've got simmering down in the ward. In the morgue. Sorry, in the morgue. In the morgue. In the morgue, I said, these things happen routinely all the time, you know, with these guys. In the morgue, a female pathology resident from Israel, dynamite, grooves on Thanatos, like me. Romeo and Juliet, man, so long. Okay?
Well, poetic license.
And last, the Runt. That's John Ritvo, noted psychiatrist now. Okay. Supported by Eat My Dust Eddie and Hyper Hooper was the Runt coming to the 10 o'clock meal with that same shot out of a cannon look as Potts. Harold the Runt Runsky had been a friend of mine through 4 years at the BMS. Blah, blah, blah. Now the Runt looked diffused. His mustache drooped. As he sat down, he took out a pill box, put a pill on his hamburger, and munched it down. When I asked what it was, he said, Valium, vitamin V. I've never been so nervous in my life. Were you on call last night? Nope, tonight. Hooper's was on call last night. When I asked Hooper how it had been, he got that same gleam in his eyes he'd gotten at the autopsy stuff, and he giggled, great, just great. 2 deaths, 1 permission for the post-mortem. Watch it in the morning. Fantastic. Does the Valium help? Potts asked the Runt. It makes me feel kind of sleepy, but I feel pretty unflappable. I'm writing orders for it for all my patients. What? I asked, you're putting all of them on the Valium too? Why not? They're all very nervous having me as their doctor. Here they are. Okay. All right, Barry starts. Well, each of us will give a little, say something.
Say something.
Say something.
Who would have thought, right?
Keep it brief, okay?
Yeah.
You too.
Don't worry.
I guess I just want to say I was there 40 years ago visiting from the outside, looking in and charting these 40 years by your side. And I just feel like this book has been a phenomenon. It's really hard, as someone said, to pin down. Is it true? Is it not true? It's fiction. It is fiction. You called it fiction of resistance. But in that realm, we're sort of it's half true and it's half not. It's truer than true. I think satire, as we've come to talk about it, and as you mentioned, is really, in some sense, by humor, by exaggeration, there's some truth that gets across that might not with just plain narrative. And I think, I think of the Publishers Weekly of putting the 10 best satires in Western history literature, and House of God was 2. And Steve says, "Why? What's wrong with 1?" With Don Quixote. But I think that sort of not to miss, and this is why I love the Medicine and Humanities program here, not to miss, this is fiction. And we all sort of have been characters in fiction. So I know what it's like to be, someone just asked for my autograph as Barry. And it's just like Shem. It's half real and half not real for all of us. And all of us have lived our lives kind of also being characters in this book. And I think people can speak to that. But I just want to say this journey of 40 years from the publication, watching you in the hospital, watching you reading this to all these guys sitting there drinking and smoking and reading and laughing and processing the year, watching the book come out, going from that wedding to book come out. You were surprised when people were angry at you. But I also have watched this sort of 40 years, and I remember so vividly you reading me this letter you got. I'm an intern, a resident at the VA in Memphis, and if I didn't have your book here, I'd kill myself. This kind of sense of having been heard, having a truth told. I've heard so many people. You still get 3 or 4 emails a day from people all over the world that have been touched and triggered and sense of being not so crazy, that some things got told. I think of the student in Germany who said to you, "How could you have been so courageous to speak out?" What was it? And I think of so many voices, and just sitting in the seminar with you at NYU, watching the really deep processing going on of this, what is true, what's still true, what's the universal? And I think watching you come to, as an artist, as a writer, coming to find your voice as a writer, and as well as your voice as a healer in the world. I've been at many, 50 graduation, medical school graduations where Steve has spoken. I've been all over the world at events on how to stay human in medicine, so that dialogue, this conversation has been going for 40 years. What an amazing experience to see all that. And I just have also, been watching as a partner and as a co-writer and a co-parent and a life partner, and just really beautiful to watch this whole unfolding. And it's really wonderful to have this opportunity and to feel like, this time at NYU too has been you being recognized for all these things and having an opportunity to really meet and touch and empower young students here. It's pretty wonderful. So it's great to be with all of you again. It's kind of amazing, poignant, touching, just deeply touching, the friendships, the camaraderie, this kind of sense of having been not only in a time of life together, but in a book together that's been read 3 million copies so far.
So, first of all,
Grab a microphone.
Here, Rich. Okay.
So first of all, let me just say that I deny everything, even the parts that are true. But I think, there's been a lot of discussion today about what's true and what's not true, and Janet referred to that as well. But I think some of that discussion, actually misses the point. Emotionally, it's all true. And if that were not so, we wouldn't be here today. The book wouldn't be in its 40th printing. It wouldn't have sold 3 million copies. So yes, so is each incident and biblical exegesis? Well, it probably is roughly as faithful as the Bible. But there are historical antecedents, at least, that are transmuted by the writer's gift into memorable writing. I mean, Steve is a brilliant writer. I thought that no one can question that. And a lot of the humor comes from his recounting of the episodes. But it is also true that gallows humor was the currency of our relationships. And it was the way that we coped. And we did need to cope because it was a difficult environment. This was 1973, so remember back Vietnam War. Many of our friends and colleagues were in Vietnam or had served in Vietnam, and we had the privilege of medical deferments, and we were quite aware of that. But on the other hand, this was our battlefield, and we weren't being targeted, and there's a big difference. Obviously, nobody was shooting at us, but the people dying around us were legion. And I think that's the emotional truth that's in the book. There's another issue that I wanted to address very briefly. I mean, there's obviously a lot of people describe it differently, but cynicism was a word that was used. Certainly, rage and anger is on almost every page. But I think it's very important to understand that was our coping mechanism to deal with our impotence in the face of human suffering. Had we been cold or indifferent to the suffering around us, we wouldn't have had those reactions, and we wouldn't have felt them so strongly, and they wouldn't have been so scarifying. And again, I think that's a truth, an emotional truth, that is very much true in medicine today. I mean, there's, of course, scientific medicine and the wonders of medicine, of course, and one can certainly argue that medical art and science is one of the highest achievements or one of the defining achievements of humanity. At the same time, I think most of us are acutely aware of its limitations. And so this is a book that touches on some of the achievements, but focuses more on the limitations. And those limitations are every bit as true today, every bit, slightly transmuted, but every bit as true today as they were 40 years ago. And there's no particular reason to believe they're not going to be every bit as true 20 years from now, unless we change the way that we provide medical care. Dr. Sharon asked a very challenging and provocative question, and which is, why don't we all do more? And I was thinking of what my answer to that question could be, and the best I can do is answer her question with a question. And that is, Why are the problems so widespread, almost universally perceived in both quality of medical care and the depersonalization of medicine? I think when we get to answering that question, we'll get closer to the answer about why we all individually and collectively don't do more. So I think that's what I wanted to say. So thank you for listening.
You want me to go next?
Yeah, this is the Runt, John Ritvo.
Yeah, and that was a bit of poetic license that he took with my name, because in the internship I was called the Ritz, but I think I said in another setting, I think it probably did capture some of my immaturity and vulnerability at the time, and maybe still. And I guess I'll speak a more personal narrative. Yes, I was terribly anxious. The Valium is also a bit of poetic license. The closest I came to taking Valium was coming on to Ward 6 South from my vacation in September, and Steve had written on the board general orders to the nurses to give Dr. Ritvo 10 milligrams of IM Valium on arrival on the ward. Personally, for me, the book, well, the experience, first of all, was, very personally important in terms of maturation and overcoming my anxiety, really as a doctor and as a professional. And just as Roy is described as terribly anxious before in the beginning of his internship, I was probably tenfold as anxious as he was. The idea that people's lives were depending on me, and and the fear that something I might miss or something I didn't do in all the hubbub and being pulled in 1,000,001 directions would lead to someone dying was terrifying. And I was, for the first couple months, I was really running around like a chicken with my head cut off, and that was what Steve was prescribing Valium for. I think both Steve and my fellow interns were responsible for both keeping me together and helping me overcome that. And I don't know that Steve directly said that, but I think I understood from him, and maybe from the others too, that there were really only a limited number of things that I needed to attend to make sure my patients lived through the night, and that everything else could be taken care of and thought of by people the next day on rounds. And with that analysis of the situation, I think I calmed down quite a bit. Of course, the gallows humor and the camaraderie were also essential to the calming down. And as several of my colleagues have pointed out today, Walt Eades, or we knew him as Nick, but he appears in the book as Chuck, he was better than Valium. He had such a cool demeanor and seemed so unflappable and he spoke in such soft and measured tones that, he just to hear him talk was calming. And reference has been made to the Vietnam War. Yeah, this was our Vietnam. It was, it had the the trauma, not of our facing death or of our comrades facing death, but we were facing death all the time in our patients and feeling responsible or struggling with our responsibility for their mortality. And then on top of that, the incredible fatigue of being, on every other night. It was mostly every third night. There was a final. I didn't get to the medical ICU until the end of the year, and that was every other night. There was really there was no time to process any of this with anyone else other than the other guys who were going through it. And I think, like a military unit, we revered the heroic, experienced people who were our immediate seniors, the junior residents. And, they are amalgamated into the fat man in the book, all of the positive qualities that we loved in the junior residents who we felt knew what we were going through, and they had just been through it before. Everyone else above us, including the senior residents who Steve referred to as the 00 series, or Licensed to Kill, were suspect and seemed, much more concerned about climbing the academic ladder. Okay, that's enough.
Thank you, Runt. Next, you've already heard, is Walter Eades, Chuck in the book.
Well, I see this whole thing as being pretty overwhelming. I didn't realize that what we were doing was going to be that great, or coming back to, this, and then to see all these people out here is pretty overwhelming that, that what we did back and then was such a meaningful thing to people today. Most of the time, like Runt said, we were just trying to cope, okay? It was some bad days, bad times, and one of my primary reasons for getting into medical school was to get out of the Vietnam War. And after being at the BI, it was like being back at war again, okay? And I have to say, just one anecdote about Steve, which I thought I should mention, was one day I was working in the ICU, of course, every other night. The chief of cardiology's mother was admitted to the ICU. So I was pretty scared and had a rough night trying to keep her alive until the next day that he was coming in to see her. So about 2:30 in the morning, Steve comes in. He says, "Boy, you look bad." I said, "It's been a bad night, Steve." He says, "Hold on." About 10 minutes later, he comes back with a gin and tonic.
Now, just listening to Walter, I mean Chuck, you hear his voice, and he's human Valium, okay? I mean, this guy, you listen to him, you just immediately, that's why he's so cool and collected. And the rest of us were frantic. So I just want to, first of all, I'm very privileged, first of all, to know Steve, because I really feel like I know one of the great authors of the 20th and 21st century with knowing Steve. I really mean that. His ability to observe what was going on in the way that he did was a gift. And I haven't said this before, but our chief of medicine was ready to fire Steve about halfway through the internship. He was so beside himself, but he couldn't fire him because we were the best internship in the United States, and there was nothing he could do. So one day, we had these, people used to go to the NIH for 2 years and then come back as chief resident, and we had this one guy who was an expert in colonic diseases and stuff, and he had kind of a tight colon himself. And we were all supposed to wear ties every day. So Steve comes in one day with a turtleneck, and they go, "Bergman, where's your tie?" "Right here, sir." And, you'd find Steve, and we had this intern's room with double bunk beds, and Steve would be up in the upper bunk bed and talking to his students on the phone going, "There's no case you cannot manage from the upper bunk." So Steve had a lot of wonderful aspects, but I do think we all did care about the patients, and this was kind of our way. Now, I just have to say a quick word about Thanatos and all the death stuff. He made all that up. That's none of that. None of that. What I would say is we had a post-derby. So there was the guy who got the most posts got 3 free days in Atlantic City as a vacation, and there was another resident or intern by the name of Eric Larson, and I beat him by 1 post, which was totally accidental because, of course, we had no control over who was dying, and we're happy about people dying. But in the book, there's a fist fight between the two of us at the end because Eric had the very first 2 weeks of vacation and had to work the rest of the year. He really could have used the 3 days off, but I think that. The post-derby and all of this was interesting, but I still get asked today by people, are you Hyper Hooper in the book? And so I just want to tell Steve, I've been on many study sections and stuff. You're more famous for being in that book than for anything else you'll ever do in your life. So thank you, Steve.
All right, can I just add to that story? I surprised you today. He was great at getting autopsies, Hyper Hooper. He was fantastic. And he went to Atlantic City, he won the prize of the pathological convention or whatever it was. And I had to take care of his patients. There was this one cardiac guy who was really he had trouble, but I worked all weekend to keep him alive. Monday morning, Hooper comes back from his vacation. We go on rounds, and we come to this guy's room. Hooper stands at the foot of the bed, says something. The guy has a massive heart attack and dies.
I just want to say one more thing, because I think one of the things that as much as you love all the controversy about this, the thing that was most upsetting was people saying you didn't take care of patients well. And I feel like all of them were just incredibly devoted, and you too, that none of this was about acting out as a doctor. It was all the stuff we've been talking about, but feels like it really needs to be said very clearly. Yeah.
I'd just like to second that too, because we've talked quite a bit about relationships, and I mean, there's something about at least metaphorically a battlefront experience that makes for very intense relationships. But we were, and so but I think it's fair to say that we were equally committed to 2 things. One is we came to Beth Israel with our ideals largely intact. And I can't say that we left with our ideals intact, but certainly we fought to preserve them as hard as we could. So we were committed to good outcomes. In fact, we had nothing but contempt for physicians that we saw in the hospital who were providing lousy medical care. We had utter contempt for them, and it's part of that, and part of the rage that you see in the book is expressed for third-rate doctors providing fourth-rate medicine. The other thing is that in the intensity of those relationships, we took care of each other, not emotionally and so forth, yes, and with humor, but the point of it is, when one of us let the next guy down, if one of us didn't do our job well, not only were we shortchanging the patient, we were shortchanging the next guy who's taking care of that patient. It's astounding to me that people still get grants today to study the best way to do medical handoffs. It's not that complicated. We did them on 3x5 cards, and one of us could take care pretty well of a ward of 25 or 30 patients based on a 15-minute handoff. And we wouldn't think of leaving the hospital without doing the handoff. And frankly, we wouldn't think about leaving the hospital in the middle of a patient who was in acute decline and saying, good luck tonight. So those are, that's part of the intensity of the experience, and it's part of the intensity of the relationships that you see in the book. Should we open it?
Okay, should we open it up to questions, comments? Questions are best.
Hi, I'm Gail Squires. Actually went to med school, read their book, first year of medicine, and not this necessarily related, but I did an MBA and decided not to practice. But now I actually work in patient experience, and so we're talking about the power of observation. I actually think that's incredibly important. My question, though, is actually related to the book, and I'm sort of curious, to what extent do people identify you guys as the characters that you inspired, and how has that actually impacted your own practice, positively or negatively, or anything along those lines?
Well, I'll start off on that. I just say people know that I'm Hyper Hooper and they meet me as Hyper Hooper. I immediately deny some of the negative stuff, but one of the sayings I always say is stay hyper, it's the best defense, because you have so much to do. That, I mean, they didn't bring up the fact that the attending in the morning expected you to be able to explain all the little details. And when I went out west, one of the chiefs of medicine out there had been an assistant professor at the BI, and he tried to pimp me on some stuff. And I said, you definitely got the wrong guy. Because I used to read Goodman and Gilman all night. I would stay up all night studying voraciously. And really, we were the transportation department. We were the lab. We did the smears. We did the bacterial cultures. I lost 5 pounds eating 5 meals a day. And midnight supper was the highlight of our life. I mean, we would sit and we were literally like Saturday Night Live writers going back and forth and giving jokes and stuff. And Steve wrote everything down, little to our knowledge. He was the Leopold Bloom of Beth Israel Hospital. You know, he was really taking the stream of consciousness that we were living and recording it. And it's a priceless gift that was generalizable everywhere. When I've been back to California to a county hospital, same stuff's going on. Go anywhere here, same stuff's going on. It's universal. And so I think it's just a real gift to medicine to have that type of observation.
Well, I've had two kinds of experience. Early in my career as a psychiatrist, I had at least one female patient who didn't want to see me after she learned who I was in the book. Otherwise, in my academic capacity, the director of medical student education for the Department of Psychiatry tells the students coming on my service that I was a character in the House of God, so they asked me about it. And my usual response is, read the book carefully, and I think you'll figure out who I was. But I usually don't then go ahead and tell them who it was. But one student who said, oh, that's my favorite book. And when I said, read the book carefully, he said, I've read it a couple times. And I said, read it carefully and you'll figure out who I was. He said, oh, I don't want to read it again. So that diminished it. That diminished his grade.
So I think the House of God, I think for all of us, was an indelible and seminal part of our medical training, and that certainly will never change. That's on our resume. I don't think typically we put our identification on the House of God in the resume. Where it comes up is in casual conversation, because the book is discussed, as you know, it's discussed, it's unpredictable where it'll be discussed, but wherever there are groups of physicians around, there's a possibility of a reference to a House of God or a metaphor or a joke or a story to the book. And then, based on a careful assessment of the audience, and which includes not only a mental status exam, but a judgment of whether they're capable of actually understanding the book. And most people who have read it are indeed more than capable of understanding it. Then on occasion, I and I imagine my friends will reveal our identities, and that always leads to a vivid discussion.
I became a celebrity.
What? He likes it. Yeah. This is a little off, but we were in Hawaii in one of the seminars, day long, How to Stay Human in Medicine, and a medical student had just come back from his interview at Beth Israel in Boston, and they had this sales thing about why you should come to Boston with a slideshow for the prospective interns. And one of the things is medical team for the Red Sox, baseball team. Second is House of God. This was now a sales point to get interns to come.
Well, along those lines, I'm shameless. Sam Shameless, you can call me.
Another name.
What I have learned to do, if, for instance, Janet's aged mother, she eventually lived a long life to 102, almost 102 in Florida. And of course, she had doctor upon doctor upon doctor. I knew her for almost 50 years, of course. And when she got a doctor or had something coming up, she would often say, "Could you call the doctor?" And try to make sure he's doing the right thing. And I really learned how to do this because I'd call the doctor in Florida. They don't want to talk to another doctor in the north. I'm the son-in-law of Roz Surrey. They don't want that. And they very mean to me. And so I didn't get very far. Then I thought, and it started something. Then I thought, okay. I'm blah, blah, I'm Dr. blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, have you ever read The House of God? Oh, yeah, it's my favorite book. I say, well, I wrote that book. And, out it comes, and she got the best medical care. She lived to 102 years old. In fact, though, it got hard sometimes. One guy, one doctor in Florida said, I'm Samuel Shem. You're not. And I said, I am. He said, you're not. Prove it. How can you? And the latest, of course, is the next generation. Our daughter had what I diagnosed correctly as acute appendicitis several years ago. We take her to Newton Wellesley Hospital. It's Yom Kippur. Nobody's there. A skeletal crew of people, And we're in the cubicle, and we're waiting and waiting. Nobody's seeing her. So finally, I say, okay, I got to pull the card again. Nurse comes in. I say, when they come? Oh, well, I don't know. There aren't too many. Oh, have you ever read the 65-year-old nurse? Have you ever read The House of God? Oh, I love it. It's my favorite book. I say, well, I wrote it. She said, really? And she throws her arms around me and gives me a big hug. Next thing you know, everybody's in the room. The surgeon's ready. She's on her way down to the emergency room, And actually, whenever I go in, one last tiny story, because I was working too hard, et cetera, I all of a sudden at dinner one night noticed I was an atrial fib. I diagnosed an irregularity, Newton Wellesley again. I told them I was House of God, and that helped. I got attention. They gave me medicines. It wasn't breaking. It was going on and on and on. It got to be 11 o'clock, almost 11 o'clock at night. And the cardiologist said, okay, look, I'm going to have to admit you to the resident upstairs, and bang, normal sinus rhythm. I swear to God. It was like getting a shock. See you later.
Thank you.
Questions? Yeah.
It was very interesting you're talking about kind of the Vietnam era and very much how the experience, this battlefield experience, and how you supported each other. And to get through this unique experience of internship. I'm struck by whether, the book and this helped to reduce the stress and possibly PTSD you might have had, after an experience like that. And then, as I think of the residents or the interns now who are going through it, there seems to be there's hopefully a lot more recognition that they need to be, you need this awareness, or you need this coping to get through it. You seem to get through it by yourself.
Got through it with each other.
With each other, but there wasn't, the program is not asking you how you're doing, the program's not offering you counseling.
No, we had two psychologists by the name of
Carol Nadelson?
They were psychiatrists. I'm sorry, Ted and Carol Nadelson, and they did psychiatry rounds with us. And these were scheduled rounds. Forgotten how often they were, but we went around to patients, and we were all in a group. And what was crazy was they were discussing the patients, but they were really doing psychiatry on us. So it was very clever how they couched that, right? They were really giving us therapy as we were going around. I think everybody pretty much realized that. So I personally, I think the big thing for me, I was crazy. I would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling my wife's blood pressure and talking and mumbling about dose this, dose that. And the nurses said, always make sure he's awake before you take a verbal order, which of course now is illegal. But I would just mumble. And so that was my stress. But I don't know if anybody else suffered PTSD. I know you didn't.
No, I didn't.
I certainly found reading the book when it came out very helpful because it came out right as I started as an attending, and which was somewhat similarly stressful in terms of the level of responsibility, and it helped me with that. I don't think that I had post-traumatic stress disorder, or I'm not sure any of us did from this. But later in reading accounts of the Vietnam War, I felt I could see the similarities between this experience. I think the book that made the most impact on me that way was James Webb's Fields of Fire, about an infantry platoon in Vietnam, a Marine platoon.
Yeah, I think PTSD would be too strong a term to describe what our experiences were. I mean, none of us took time off. None of us deviated on our medical paths. Although I'm sure our ultimate career choices may have been affected some, but none of us reacted acutely, I think, to the experience. I do think the book was very helpful coming out of 1978, I think. Yeah, so a few years after the internship. So I think we all loved the book. I think we were all proud of the book. I think it helped us integrate the experience. I think it helped us see it through the broader lens. It helped us see it through not only Steve's eyes, but the eyes of some of our colleagues. And the emotional truths that are so vivid in the book, it was very helpful for me to see those depicted in that way and not to think of them simply or not to think of the challenges or the issues or the scars as my personal experience alone or my personal failings or weaknesses, right?
Can I just say one more thing? Me too. Yeah. I just wanted to say that, this is about medicine. This is also about the culture in the world. People talking about the war, the 60s, all through the House of God. Nixon is on the TVs. I think that the sense for me of looking back on it is how much I didn't understand that at the time and how much I do now, that medicine reflects our culture. It's not all about changing medicine. This is all of the things we've talked about today, the disconnections, the screens, the issues about relationships and division and depression and the world. It's all the corporate kind of mentalities, the electronics, all of which are struggles, the environmental challenges, the future all of it is in that relationship. And I think for me, the capacity, and we've come to understand over time, is how the relationship in that room really reflects the whole world and the culture, and that you can't just see it in a personal way, or it's not just about medicine. I just want to make sure we end with that, because I think that's part of the gift you have, is seeing that whole.
Yeah, just to end, and I'm so happy that Bob and Steve and David are doing this. I'll end a little bit with the Fat Man. I was accused of being, a very angry person, a very cynical person with this book. But then I went back to the book when I started speaking all over on how to stay human in medicine. And I went back and I looked, I said, there's hope in this book. And it comes a lot from the fat man. And there's one phrase, he's always telling to be with the patients. Those are the words he uses. It's about 5 times in the book. I didn't know what I was doing because there was no fat man. But being with the patients was important. And he has, in fact, I found a phrase there, what we do for our patients is we're with them so that they feel they feel some part of a grand nutty scheme. With us, they feel part of life. And I think what Janet says in a new novel, in Man's Fourth Best Hospital, The Fat Man's Back, of course. And one of the things he said is to echo Janet, which I certainly am mature enough now to talk about and write about, is that the world is in the room. When you're with a patient, that's one of the laws, kind of. The world is in the room, right? And in the broad sense. It's not just the diseases as we'd identify them. So thank you all so much, and I think there's refreshments out there.